Hi there. Welcome back to 8 p.m. Sleep Stories. I'm Joshua, the voice behind tonight's story. And tonight, I'll be here with you as we slowly settle in for the night. And if this is your first time here, I hope tonight's story and the sound of my voice help you relax and gently drift into sleep. And if you enjoy these quiet stories, you're always welcome to subscribe or leave a comment below. It truly helps support the channel and allows me to keep creating more stories for you. Before we begin, just take a moment to settle in, allowing your body to feel supported and at ease. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere else you need to be, just this quiet moment. And now, very gently, our story begins. Far beyond the crowded trade routes and the noisy southern ports, there existed countless small land masses scattered across the dark northern ocean. Some appeared clearly upon old charts. Others were marked only by faded circles drawn by uncertain mariners many decades earlier. And some places had never been named at all. On a cold evening near the end of autumn, a young cartographer named Adrian prepared a small wooden sailboat beneath the fading light of dusk, while the harbour behind him slowly settled into quiet. The town rested beside a narrow inlet surrounded by dark rock and weathered stone buildings, worn smooth by ocean wind and many long years of cold rain. Old fishing boats rocked gently beside the dock, while lantern light flickered behind nearby windows and thin grey wood smoke drifted upward from low cottage rooftops. The colour of the sky that evening was deep and muted. A pale amber line still remained along the far western horizon, but the rest of the sky had already grown dark and heavy with approaching night. Adrian moved carefully across the wooden dock, carrying rolled parchment beneath one arm, while cold wind pulled softly at the collar of a long grey coat. The coat had belonged to his father once. The leather along the cuffs had grown thin and dark with age and salt air, but Adrian wore it every time he departed a harbour. It had always felt like the right coat for long journeys. The small sailboat waited near the edge of the dock. Unlike the large merchant vessels resting further along the harbour wall, Adrian's boat was narrow and patient, built more for endurance than for speed. The wood along the hull had darkened with many years of travel. A single lantern hung near the stern, beside several leather map containers tied carefully with rope that had been mended more than once. Adrian placed each item quietly inside the cabin. Clean water in a clay bottle, dry tea leaf in a small tin container, ink in dark-coloured bottles wrapped in thick cloth, a bundle of blank parchment, a brass compass resting inside a worn leather pouch, a small oil lamp with a replacement wick folded beside it, 2 heavy wool blankets rolled and tied with cord, a tin of salted bread wrapped in waxed paper. He arranged each item slowly, carefully, the way a traveller arranges things when there is no one watching, and no reason to hurry. For many years, Adrian had moved between distant land masses, creating careful records of forgotten coastlines and empty beaches untouched by larger trade routes. He preferred quiet places, Places where the ocean moved slowly against empty land beneath moonlight. Places where no large gatherings formed. Places where the only sound at night was the movement of cold water against old wood, and the distant call of a single bird above dark water. This particular journey would take him further north than most. 3 weeks earlier, an old mariner had spoken quietly about a dark landmass hidden somewhere beyond the northern fog. No name, no village, no harbour lamp, only rock, cedar, an empty beach untouched by any traveller the old man had known. Most mariners ignored such talk. Old men in harbour inns told many stories. Most were half memory and half imagination. But Adrian had copied the rough bearings carefully into a notebook that same evening, beneath a single candle flame at the corner table of a quiet inn. The handwriting had been careful, deliberate. The kind of handwriting a person produces when something important has just been told to them and they do not want to lose a single detail. And ever since that evening, Adrian had thought often about the unnamed landmass waiting somewhere beyond the northern ocean. Now the journey was finally beginning. The final trace of amber light faded slowly behind the western rock face. As Adrian untied the rope holding the sailboat beside the dock. Nearby, harbour lanterns glowed softly in the darkening air, while the faint sound of distant voices drifted briefly from a doorway, somewhere along the lane above the harbour, then disappeared again. As the door closed, cold ocean wind filled the small sail gradually. The boat drifted quietly away from the dock. Behind him, warm village lantern light reflected softly across the dark water before fading slowly into the growing night. Ahead, only the open ocean remained. The further Adrian travelled from the harbour, the quieter the world became. The water beneath the boat moved with a long, steady rhythm that evening. Not rough, not difficult, only even and patient. The kind of calm water that had been resting all day and was now settling fully into the deep quiet of night. Adrian adjusted the tiller gently and let the sail take the wind. The boat moved forward at an unhurried pace. The lantern beside the mast cast a warm circle of gold light across the deck, while the world beyond the light remained entirely dark and entirely still. He went below briefly to check the compass bearing. The needle pointed steadily north. He noted the direction in his travel log with 3 quiet ink strokes. Then he returned to the deck and stood for a long moment beside the mast, looking out across the dark water. There was nothing to look at, really. Only the ocean. Only the sky. Only the slow movement of cloud across the upper dark. And yet, Adrian stood there for a long time, simply watching. There was something about open water at night that he had never been able to fully describe in any of his notebooks. Not the colour of it exactly, not the sound of it alone. It was more like a feeling that arrived quietly when land had disappeared behind you, and you understood that for a while you were entirely on your own. Not frightening, something closer to relief. He returned below and unfolded one of the older charts across the narrow table inside the cabin. The lantern flame moved gently with each small roll of the boat. Most of the northern ocean on the old chart remained unfinished. Faint coastlines ended abruptly near empty space, where few voyagers had travelled in many generations. Some landmasses existed only as uncertain outlines, copied from mariners who may never have returned to confirm them. Others had simply been drawn from memory. The details already softened and rearranged by time. Adrian traced several faded lines carefully with one finger before marking a small note beside the empty northern area. He wrote in a slow and deliberate hand. The ink took a moment to dry. He waited for it patiently before closing the notebook. Outside the cabin window, the ocean stretched endlessly beneath the pale beginning of moonrise. The moon appeared first as a pale edge of light just above the far horizon. Then slowly, over the course of perhaps an hour, it rose fully into the open night sky, and the surface of the water below it changed entirely. What had been dark became silver. What had been flat became textured with gentle long movement. Adrian stood again on the deck and watched the moon travel upward. He had seen the moon rise above the ocean many times before, but it never became ordinary. He made a small note about the position of the moon and the direction of the wind and the temperature of the air, which had grown colder in the last hour. Then he went below and poured a small amount of cold water into the tin cup, swallowed it slowly, and lay back against the bunk for a while to rest while the boat continued forward on its own. He did not intend to fall fully into sleep. He only wanted to close his eyes for a short time and let the movement of the boat carry him quietly. The rocking was very gentle there below the deck. The sound of water against the hull was close and constant, not loud, only present, the way a familiar sound is always present and never distracting. After some time, he rose again and returned to the deck to check the bearing. The compass pointed north. The sail held the wind evenly. The ocean continued its long and patient movement beneath the boat. All was exactly as it had been. He adjusted the tiller only slightly before settling onto the low wooden seat near the stern and wrapping both wool blankets around his shoulders. The cold had deepened in the last while. The kind of cold that does not arrive suddenly but builds very slowly across many hours until it is simply there in full measure. Adrian pulled the blanket closer around his collar. He could feel the cold of the sea air against his face and against the back of each hand resting on the tiller. But beneath the blanket, his body remained warm enough. He watched the water move beneath the moonlight for a long time. The reflection of the moon on the ocean surface never remained completely still. It broke and reformed constantly with each small movement of the water. 1,000 pale fragments of light, always shifting, always rearranging, but always returning to something close to the same shape. Far to the north, the sky was beginning to change. The lower edge of it, just above the far horizon, had taken on a faint grey colour, not the grey of coming daylight, something older and more settled than that. The grey of deep night in the far north. Adrian recognised it. He had seen that particular grey many times on long journeys. It meant the ocean was opening ahead of him into the older and quieter places beyond the trade wind. He made a note. He adjusted his course by 2 small degrees to the east. Then he returned to watching the water. Near the middle of the night, a thin layer of fog began forming across the ocean. It arrived very gradually, first as a soft blurring of the horizon line, then as a low silver mist drifting just above the water, then as a full pale haze that softened the moonlight and quieted the distance. The further north Adrian travelled, the thicker the fog became. Soon the horizon itself disappeared entirely. Only the dark water immediately around the boat remained visible. Beyond that, only pale grey emptiness in every direction. The sound of the ocean changed too. Not louder, only closer. The water touching the hull felt more immediate in the fog. Each small wave seemed to arrive from a shorter distance. Each movement of the boat felt more deliberate. Adrian slowed the sail slightly and kept his attention on the compass. He had travelled through fog many times. The ocean always carried its own direction, even when the eye could find nothing to hold. The pull of the current, the lean of the wind, the particular kind of cold that arrived from certain directions. These things could be read even when nothing could be seen. He continued onward. The fog muffled the sound of everything. Even the creak of the mast seemed softer than usual. Even the movement of rope against wood seemed quieter. There was a deep, padded quality to the world inside fog. The kind of quiet that made thinking feel slower and less urgent. Adrian found himself drifting between observation and something close to half sleep more than once during that stretch of the journey. Each time he would notice the drift and return his attention to the compass, the tiller, the direction of the wind against the sail. Then, a short while later, he would begin drifting again. The fog moved in long, slow layers above the water. He watched it from time to time, the way it moved without appearing to move, the way it thickened and thickened again as the boat passed through it. Hours passed. The fog continued. The compass remained steady. The wind was very light now. Adrian rested against the stern with the tiller held loosely in one hand and his notebook open but unwritten in the other. He had meant to add more notes, but the fog and the cold and the slow movement of the boat had made writing feel unnecessary. There was nothing to add that the ocean was not already saying far more quietly than any notebook could hold. He closed the cover of the notebook gently and simply continued north. Several hours later, while standing near the front of the boat and looking out into the fog, Adrian noticed something in the distance, a dark shape. At first, it appeared to be simply another thickening of the fog bank. A place where the pale grey became slightly more solid than the rest. But it did not drift. It did not thin and shift the way the fog shifted around it. It remained where it was. Adrian kept watching. He reduced speed without thinking about it. His hand found the rope holding the sail and eased it open slightly. The boat slowed. The sound of the water against the hull became gentler, and slowly, very slowly, the dark shape in the distance grew larger. First, there was the shape of height, a rise in the far grey that could only be rock or land. Then the faint suggestion of a line above the fog, the top of something tall, a cliff edge, the outline of a tree at the very top of a rise. Then more, dark cedar along the cliff top, pale beach curving away at the foot of the rock, the slow and heavy movement of the ocean against the land. The unnamed place. Adrian brought the boat to nearly no movement at all and stood at the front rail, watching the landmass emerge from the fog ahead of him. It appeared slowly, the way something important always appears slowly when you have been travelling toward it for a long time. Dark rock, old wood in the cedar along the upper ridge, pale empty beach, no harbour, no lamp, no sign of any recent arrival. The place looked as though no one had stood on that beach for a very long time, possibly ever. Adrian watched it for some while before doing anything else at all. He simply stood at the rail and looked at the unnamed landmass rising silently from the fog. The ocean moved against it with a steady and ancient patience. The cedar along the cliff moved in the night wind. Everything else was entirely still. Then Adrian went below, checked the chart one final time, made a careful note of the compass bearing and the estimated distance from the last known point, and returned to the deck to bring the boat slowly around the northern face of the landmass, looking for calmer water and a place to anchor. The narrow inlet appeared on the eastern face of the landmass, a curve of pale beach sheltered by low cliff on both sides. The water inside the inlet was calmer than the outer ocean, rocking only with long and gentle movement. Adrian brought the boat in slowly. He lowered the anchor over the side and let it drop into dark water below. The chain ran out steadily for some time before it stopped. The boat settled into position almost immediately, moving only with the quiet inland rhythm of the sheltered water. For a long moment after the anchor was set, Adrian stood near the mast and simply looked toward the beach. The pale sand curved from cliff to cliff in a wide and empty arc. A line of cedar grew along the rise above the back of the beach. Their trunks were dark and very old. The branches above moved in the wind with a soft and continuous sound. Between the cedar and the beach, a strip of long pale beach grass bent and straightened in the slow rhythm of the sea wind. No fire, no structure, no old rope or rusted iron or any other sign of past arrival. Only the beach, only the cedar, only the dark northern rock. Adrian lowered the small rowing boat from the side of the sailboat and loaded it carefully with a canvas tent pack, the lantern, the tin of tea, the blank parchment, the ink container, one wool blanket, and the notebook. Then he climbed over the side and rowed the short distance to the beach. The rowing boat made almost no sound on that calm water. Only the quiet pull of the oar through cold, dark ocean. He reached the beach and stepped out into shallow, cold water. His boots pressed into the wet sand at the edge of the tide. He pulled the rowing boat further onto dry land and stood for a moment at the edge of the beach, looking at the place he had arrived. The footprint he had made in the wet sand at the water edge was the only mark on the entire beach. He stood looking at it for a moment. Then he picked up the supply pack and walked toward the cedar line to make camp. Adrian chose a sheltered area where the cedar came close to the back of the beach, and the cliff on the northern side blocked the worst of the ocean wind. He worked quietly and without hurry. The tent went up first. A low canvas structure held by 2 wooden poles and several lengths of cord tied around the base of a large cedar trunk on one side and a heavy stone on the other. It was not a large tent, only enough for one person to lie flat with a pack beside them and a lantern within easy reach. Adrian had lived out of that tent for perhaps 200 nights over the years of his travels. He knew every fold of the canvas, every way the cord needed to be tied to hold against ocean wind. When the tent was ready, he gathered dry wood from the beach. Old driftwood, pale and smooth from years of salt water and sun. Cedar branches fallen from the tree line above. Several lengths of old dry root from the base of a fallen tree at the edge of the beach grass. He arranged the wood carefully inside a ring of flat, dark stone. And after several patient attempts with the flint and cloth from his kit, a small fire took hold among the dry kindling at the center. The flame was small at first, cautious, feeling out the dry wood around it before committing to anything further. But within a few minutes, it had grown into a steady, warm fire that sent a thin line of pale wood smoke upward into the cold night air. Adrian crouched beside it for a moment with both hands extended toward the heat. The warmth arrived gradually, then fully. He had not realized how cold he had become during the long crossing until that moment. He stayed crouched beside the fire for a while, letting the heat move through his hands and up into his arms. Then he hung the small tin pot on the metal hook he always carried in his pack and added cold water from the clay bottle. While the water began its slow journey toward boiling, he retrieved the blank parchment and the ink and the small detail brush from his pack and set them on the flat surface of the largest stone beside the fire. He uncapped the ink very carefully. The ink was a deep, dark color, almost black, the kind that dried cleanly on parchment and did not fade for many years. Adrian looked out at the coastline visible from the camp. He could see from this position the southern curve of the inlet, the line of the cliff above, the approximate position of the boat at anchor, the northern edge of the beach where another line of rock began. He began with the inlet. His hand moved slowly and deliberately across the blank parchment. One line, a pause, an adjustment, another line, slightly curved. The work of hand-drawing a coastline from a single lantern-lit position on an empty beach was not work that could be hurried. Every line was an approximation, every curve an estimate. Later, it would all be checked and corrected with more careful measurement. But the first version of a map always began like this, slowly, by hand. by the light of whatever lantern or fire was available. The water in the pot came slowly to a gentle boil. Adrian lifted it carefully from the hook, using the folded cloth from his coat pocket, and placed it beside the stone. He added a small measure of dried tea leaf from the tin and set the pot aside to rest for a few minutes. The smell of tea in the cold open air beside a fire at the edge of a dark and empty beach was one of the finest things Adrian had encountered in all his years of travel. He always paused for a moment when that smell arrived, simply to notice it. He poured the tea carefully into the tin cup. The cup was dark from long use. Its handle had been resoldered once at a harbour town in the east, where a good metal worker had been found. It held heat well and never altered the taste of the liquid inside it. Adrian held the cup in both hands and let the warmth spread through his palms. Then he drank slowly. The tea was strong and slightly bitter and very warm. He looked at the fire while he drank. The driftwood burned with an uneven colour. Some of it gave off pale white flame from the salt content in the old wood. Some burned a steady orange amber. He watched the different colours move and overlap, and then watched the fire settle into a long, even burn that would likely hold for an hour or more before needing more wood. He finished the cup of tea, set the cup on the stone beside the pot, and returned to the map. The work on the map continued for a long time. At intervals, Adrian would stop drawing and simply look out at a section of the coastline to study some detail of curve or cliff angle before returning his attention to the parchment. The wind moved through the cedar above the camp with a soft and continuous sound. The fire beside him settled and shifted. The lantern beside the map flickered gently, but held its flame steadily. It was very quiet work, the kind of work that emptied a person of other thought gradually and replaced it only with the immediate problem in front of them. This particular angle of cliff, this particular curve of tide line below, the approximate height of the rock formation at the northern end of the inlet. His hand moved. His eyes moved between the parchment and the beach, and the parchment again. After a while, he set the brush down and simply sat beside the fire for a moment, not thinking about anything particular. The fire moved. The cedar moved. The dark water at the edge of the inlet moved with its long, patient rhythm. He could hear the larger ocean on the other side of the cliff. A deeper, heavier sound than the sheltered water inside the inlet. The sound of open water moving against rock without the protection of a cove. The two sounds together, the quiet inner water and the larger outer ocean, created a kind of layered rhythm that filled the air around the camp. Adrian listened to it for a while with his hands around the warm cup of tea he had refilled. Then he lay back against the pack for a moment and looked up at the sky above the cedar. The fog had thinned during the time he had been on the beach. Between the cedar branches above him, he could now see a clear section of the upper sky. A wide, dark space scattered with more cold, bright points of light than he usually saw in the southern harbours. The northern sky was always fuller than the southern one. He lay looking at it for some time. The fire crackled once or twice beside him. The cedar moved overhead. The double sound of the ocean continued at its steady rhythm from both sides of the cliff. His thoughts, which had been busy and deliberate during the mapping work, became slower now. Less directed, they moved from the surface of the chart to the old mariner in the harbour inn, to the way the fog had looked from the deck of the boat during the crossing, to the shape of the moon rising above the open ocean, to the footprint in the wet sand that had been the first mark ever left on this beach. Or perhaps not the first. The old dock. He remembered the old mariner had mentioned a dock once, long ago, that no one had used in living memory. He would look for it tomorrow, if indeed it existed. But tomorrow was still many hours away. After a while, Adrian rose from the pack and prepared for the walk along the beach. He had learned over many journeys that the best time to do the preliminary measurement of a new coastline was in the middle of the night, while the tide was at a predictable point. Measurement done at the wrong tide point created inaccurate maps. He checked the position of the waterline against a stick he had placed at the edge of the tide when he first arrived on the beach. The tide was receding. That was good. He would have a longer stretch of lower beach to walk, and the tide pools would be more fully exposed. He packed the measurement rope into one coat pocket and the smaller notebook into the other. He carried the lantern in one hand and the measuring rod, a thin length of straight cedar wood marked at regular intervals with small ink lines in the other. Then he walked north along the beach. The beach at night was very different from the beach in the light of the fire. The lantern gave only a small circle of warm orange light. Beyond it, the beach existed in full dark. The cliff to one side, the waterline to the other, the long pale strip of sand between them. His own footprint appearing and disappearing at the edge of the lantern light as he walked. The sound of the water changed as he moved away from the sheltered inlet and came closer to the outer face of the landmass. The long ocean movement grew more present. The sound of it filled the air more fully. Adrian could feel the cold of it in the wind now. A deeper cold than the inlet wind. Ocean cold. Open water cold. He walked carefully, stopping at intervals to measure with the rope and mark the notebook. The width of the beach at the high tide line. The distance from the cliff base to the waterline. The position of a large rock formation at the edge of the tide. Small numbers. Careful lines. The work was slow and methodical and entirely absorbing. He moved around a low rock face that extended into the water at an angle and found a longer stretch of beach beyond it. This section had finer sand. The kind of pale, very fine sand that held the lantern light differently and made the beach surface almost luminous in the glow. He crouched and picked up a small amount of the sand and felt it between two fingers. Very fine. Almost no texture at all. The kind of sand that took a long time to form. He let it fall from his fingers, watched it disappear back into the beach. then continued walking. Further along, in a section where the cliff angled inward and created a deep recess in the coastline, Adrian found what remained of an old wooden structure at the base of the rock. It was not much. Several lengths of dark, weathered wood, half buried in packed sand at the cliff base. A rusted iron ring set into the rock above them, the remains of what had once been a supporting beam, now almost completely reclaimed by the beach. He held the lantern close and examined it. The wood was very old. The grain of it had nearly dissolved into the surrounding sand. Only the outline of the original shapes remained, but from those outlines he could reconstruct what it had been. A small dock, or perhaps the landing platform for a rope and pulley arrangement, the kind sometimes used on isolated coastlines to lower and raise supplies between the cliff top and the beach below. He looked up at the cliff above. In the lantern light, he could see nothing clearly, but he could imagine the rest of the structure that had once existed. Someone had once used this remote place with enough regularity to build something here. That was certain. He made careful notes. Dimensions, materials, approximate age based on the condition of the wood, the position of the iron ring in the cliff face. He would include this on the final map, not as an active structure, as a ruin. A small notation beside the cliff symbol, remains of dock, age uncertain. He stayed at the ruin for some time, sketching the outline of it carefully. Then he returned to the main beach and continued north. The farther Adrian walked, the rougher the shoreline became. Fine sand slowly turned into dark stone beneath high northern cliffs, while tide pools reflected fragments of moonlight and lantern glow like quiet mirrors beside the sea. He paused often to study them, sketching several into his notebook simply because they felt worth remembering. At last he reached the far edge of the island, where the cliffs dropped directly into deep black water below. There he stood quietly for some time, listening to the slow, hollow sound of the ocean moving against the ancient rock beneath the cold northern wind. When Adrian finally returned to camp, the fire had nearly faded into embers. He added more driftwood, poured the last of the tea, and sat beside the warmth while studying the unfinished map spread beneath the lantern light. Much of the island had already taken shape across the parchment, yet several areas still remained incomplete. The northern cliffs, the cedar plateau beyond the beach, the hidden rise of land behind the shoreline. He worked carefully for a while longer, adding several final lines before exhaustion slowly softened his focus, and the ink strokes became less precise. At last, Adrian rolled the unfinished parchment beside the lantern and settled beneath the blankets inside the tent. Outside, the cedar trees moved gently in the sea wind, while the waves continued their slow rhythm against the shore. His thoughts drifted quietly between the cliffs, the tide pools, and the dark ocean beyond the island before finally fading into sleep. The unfinished map rested near the tent entrance, half complete beneath the fading lantern glow, while the unnamed island remained silent beneath the stars. and the small sailboat drifted softly at anchor upon the calm northern sea. And now, our story gently comes to an end. The night has grown quiet, and the world beyond your window feels a little softer now. If your eyes are becoming heavy, then simply rest here for a while and allow the music to carry you slowly towards sleep. These calm sounds were made to help your mind become still, your breathing slow and gentle, and your thoughts drift quietly into the dark. There is nothing more you need to think about tonight, nothing more to solve, nothing more to carry. And if you are still awake, do not worry. Some nights simply take a little longer. You do not need to force sleep to arrive. Just remain comfortable, remain calm, and let the quiet night move gently around you. And perhaps, if you would like another peaceful journey before sleep, there are more quiet stories waiting nearby. Another distant train moving softly through the midnight countryside. Another lighthouse glowing beside the sea. Another hidden path beneath the moonlight. But for now, let the day slowly fade away. Let your thoughts grow softer. Let the world become quiet around you once more. Tomorrow can wait until morning. Now rest, breathe slowly, and sleep.